The sound of sirens should have been salvation. They should have been the sound of hope tearing through the night. But when the flashing lights painted my street in frantic red and blue, the ambulance didn't move. It sat at the iron gates of our community like an animal trapped in a cage. Inside that ambulance were 2 paramedics, desperate to get through. Inside my house, on the couch, my wife was slipping away. Her breaths came shallow and thin, the hiss of the oxygen tank no longer enough. And in between, standing like a self-appointed queen of order, was Monica, president of our homeowners association. Clipboard in one hand, phone raised in the other, her chin lifted with the smugness of someone who believed rules were more sacred than lives. "No unauthorized vehicles after 10, she announced, her voice cold and sharp. "This is private property. You'll have to use the service entrance." The service entrance. At midnight, with my wife gasping for air. The guard in the booth looked like a deer in headlights. Barely 20, hired to check Amazon packages, now caught between trained EMTs and a woman who wielded bylaws like weapons. His hand hovered over the release switch, trembling. Monica snapped her fingers. "Don't you dare. The board will fine you, and you'll lose your job." Inside, I heard the beeping of the portable oxygen monitors spike into panic. Ellen's oxygen levels were crashing. Every shallow breath was a countdown. I ran back to her side, tightened the mask, tried to buy her another minute. Her eyes found mine, tired, frightened, but still trusting. "Hold on," I whispered. "They're here. Just hold on." Then I sprinted back outside. The cul-de-sac glowed with strobe lights. Neighbors were gathering in their robes and slippers, whispering, recording with their phones. Some faces were pale with fear, others carried the fire of long-buried anger. Mr. Alvarez, cane in hand, shuffled closer, muttering curses in Spanish. Priya, the young mother from down the street, clutched her baby and shouted, "Open the gate. She's dying." But Monica stood firm, her SUV angled like a barricade across the lane, her voice dripping with self-importance. "Rules are rules. If we allow exceptions, chaos follows." Chaos. That word echoed in my head like poison. The paramedics shouted through the bars. "This is a medical emergency. The law requires access." One of them slammed her fist against the keypad. "Why isn't this override working?" I already knew why. Months earlier, I had requested a Knox box, the emergency override required by law. The board had denied it. The fire marshal had warned them. They ignored him. But because Monica's nephew's security company was billing the HOA thousands for repairs on a gate they deliberately left broken. It wasn't just negligence, it was profit. And now, Ellen was paying the price. I pressed both hands against the bars, my voice low but deadly steady. "Listen to me," I told the guard. "If you don't open this gate, you're complicit in her death. You won't just lose your job. You'll carry this forever." His eyes flicked to Monica, then back to me. His Adam's apple bobbed. Sweat trickled down his temple. "Don't you dare," Monica hissed, her voice sharp as glass. She pulled her phone higher, recording. "Everyone, you're my witnesses. This man is dangerous. Dangerous." The word rang in my ears. Not me, the husband trying to save his wife. The woman blocking life with a clipboard. Behind me, the alarm inside the house let out a shrill, continuous tone. Ellen's oxygen had dropped into the red zone. My hands shook, not with fear, but with rage. "Move!" I roared, rattling the steel gate. The crowd erupted. Neighbors shouted, cursed, demanded she step aside. Mr. Alvarez wedged his cane beneath the bars, straining with what little strength his 70 years had left. Sparks of rebellion cracked the air. Years of petty fines and bullying were boiling over. Monica barked back, her voice high and trembling, "Touch this property and you'll all be fined. You'll be sued." And that's when I understood. This wasn't just about Ellen anymore. It was about every family Monica had crushed under her obsession with control. Every parent fined for a stroller tire mark. Every kid banned for a skateboard ramp. Every neighbor humiliated in the name of standards. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number she never expected. The county fire battalion chief answered on the second ring. "This is narrator's name," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "We have an ambulance blocked by a gate at the Oaks HOA. My wife is coding. Authorize immediate breach." There was no hesitation. "Copy that. Rescue team is inbound. Cut it open." When I hung up, I looked straight into Monica's eyes. Her smirk wavered for the first time. She whispered, "You wouldn't dare." But I already had. In the distance, a deeper siren wailed, the heavy, relentless tone of the county fire truck. The cavalry was coming. The night air was thick with flashing light, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the cries of neighbors who had finally had enough. My wife was slipping away inside, but something else was rising outside, something Monica had never faced before. Not fear. Not obedience. Defiance. And the gate that had once been her throne was about to become her downfall. The fire truck saws cut through the gate that night, but the real cutting came later. Steel can be repaired. Trust cannot. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, Ellen asleep in the bedroom after a night in the ER, and stared at the mess of papers scattered across the wood. Medical invoices, HOA citations, copies of requests I'd filed and been denied. Each page was a scar, proof of battles fought quietly until the night everything exploded. Monica had built her empire on paper. Citations for non-conforming wheelchair ramp. Fines for excessive medical equipment deliveries. Threats to repaint the door because the color suggested a hospital environment. The sheer absurdity of it was almost funny, except the fear it created was real. People paid. People obeyed. People stayed quiet. But I wasn't just a homeowner. I'd spent 2 decades in government service. Compliance, oversight, auditing. I knew the smell of fraud the way a soldier knows the sound of gunfire. It wasn't just arrogance that drove Monica. It was greed. I dug into the records. Public filings are dry reading for most, but for me they were a map. Every HOA must file financial reports with the county. Budgets. Vendor contracts. Maintenance logs. And there it was, line after line of payments to a company called SecureGate Solutions. Listed under emergency repairs. SecureGate Solutions was run by a man named Ryan Lister. Ryan, as it turned out, was Monica's nephew. The same Ryan who drove a brand new truck while half the neighborhood lawns browned from water restrictions. The same Ryan who was seen at the clubhouse poker nights Monica always attended. The invoices were bloated, thousands of dollars billed for emergency override diagnostics. Month after month. But the Knoxbox override hadn't been functional for over a year, which meant the repairs weren't repairs at all. They were theft, and theft had nearly killed my wife. I felt the rage tighten in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. Paperwork wasn't glamorous, but it was lethal in the right hands. If Monica wanted to rule with fines and forms, then I'd fight her in the same arena. The first step was gathering allies. That afternoon, I visited Mr. Alvarez. He opened the door leaning heavy on his cane, his eyes still fiery from the night before. "You saw it too," he said without preamble. "I saw enough," I answered. I showed him the invoices. His brows knitted. They charged thousands for fake repairs, and meanwhile they threatened me $500 for painting my shutters cream instead of beige? He let out a bitter laugh. "This is a racket." Priya joined us an hour later, baby in her arms. She told us about fines for stroller marks on the sidewalk. Another neighbor, Julia, showed a citation for letting her teenage son park in the driveway instead of the garage. Everyone had stories, and every story was a brick in the wall Monica had built around our lives. But now the wall had cracks. I filed records requests with the county. I requested fire marshal inspections, gate maintenance reports, correspondence logs. Each document I gathered told the same story. Warnings ignored, laws bypassed, residents exploited. What chilled me most was an email chain buried in the county archives. Monica had been warned 3 separate times to repair the emergency access system. The last warning was blunt. Failure to comply will endanger lives and may expose board members to legal liability. Monica's reply was a single sentence. "We'll handle our community our way." Her way nearly cost Ellen her life. That night, I sat beside my wife in the hospital. Machines beeped steadily, a rhythm that was equal parts comfort and terror. She stirred and whispered, "You were shouting last night." I smiled weakly. "You heard that?" "Even through the mask," she said, her lips curving. "You sounded like you were ready to burn the world down." I squeezed her hand. "Not the world," I said softly. "Just one gate." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Word spread fast after the ambulance incident. The clubhouse, usually half empty, was packed wall to wall. Neighbors stood in the back, whispering, glaring at Monica as she shuffled to the front. She looked tired, but she still wore the armor of arrogance, a tailored blazer, heels clicking against the tile, clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword. She cleared her throat. "Residents, thank you for attending. First, let me address the situation. What happened was unfortunate, but rules exist for a reason. Without order, there is chaos. The service entrance exists for emergencies." The crowd erupted. Alvarez slammed his cane against the floor. "The service entrance is 2 miles away. A woman almost died." Priya shouted, "You endangered a life. What if it had been your family?" Monica raised her hands. "Please, emotions are running high." "But the board," I stood up. Papers in my hand, voice steady. "The board ignored 3 fire marshal warnings. The board paid over $70,000 to SecureGate Solutions, your nephew's company, for repairs that were never completed. The override system was intentionally disabled. That's not just negligence. That's fraud." The room went silent. Monica's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but I raised another document high enough for everyone to see. "This is her email. We'll handle our community our way." That's what she told the county fire marshal. And last Friday night, her way almost killed my wife. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones snapped photos. Whispers turned into shouts. Monica's voice cracked. "That's taken out of context." "Context?" I snapped. "The context is a woman gasping for air while an ambulance sat outside your gate. The context is you standing in front of paramedics like a guard dog with a clipboard." The meeting devolved into chaos. Not the kind Monica feared, but the kind she could no longer control. Neighbors shouted for her resignation. Others demanded refunds, audits, elections. For the first time, she looked small. I didn't need to scream. The papers screamed for me. When I left that night, I knew the battle was just beginning. Monica wouldn't go down easy. People like her never did. They dug in, convinced rules were shields that made them untouchable. But I had something stronger. Proof. And proof, once exposed, is harder to bury than any bylaw. The papers had landed like bombs at the HOA meeting. By the end, the crowd was shouting over each other, and Monica had fled the room with her clipboard hugged tight against her chest. For the first time, her armor had cracked. But tyrants rarely retreat for long. They regroup. They plot. And Monica was nothing if not relentless. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a string of texts from neighbors. Some were supportive. "We're with you. Stay strong." Others were hesitant. "Monica says you doctored those documents. She says you're exaggerating to cover up your wife's accident." Exaggerating. That word burned. Ellen had nearly died because of that gate. My voice had cracked shouting through steel, watching the oxygen monitor plunge. But Monica wanted to paint me as dramatic, unstable, maybe even dangerous. By noon, flyers appeared in mailboxes. Misinformation hurts communities. At the bottom, Monica's signature. She claimed I was spreading lies, that the invoices I revealed were taken out of context, that the fire marshal's warnings were administrative notes, nothing more. She accused me of grandstanding to avoid HOA dues, of exploiting a personal tragedy for attention. It was classic deflection. And for some it worked. That evening, as I walked Ellen's wheelchair down the driveway for some fresh air, I felt eyes on us. Curtains twitching. A neighbor across the street, someone who'd hugged me the night of the ambulance, now turned away quickly when I waved. Division was setting in, exactly the way Monica wanted. Ellen squeezed my hand. Her voice was soft, raspy. Don't let her break you. I won't, I promised. But the truth was, Monica wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting the truth itself. The next HOA meeting came faster than expected. Monica had called an emergency session to restore order. The clubhouse was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. People were restless, suspicious, divided. Monica stood at the front, her blazer crisp, her voice smoother than honey. Neighbors, I know emotions are high. But last week, important details were misrepresented. Our community has always valued fairness, and it's only fair you hear the full story. She gestured to a stack of papers on the table. These are records of every repair SecureGate Solutions has performed. My nephew's company has worked tirelessly to protect us from vandalism, to keep our families safe. The so-called warnings from the fire marshal were merely recommendations, not violations. And as for the incident with the ambulance, she paused dramatically. We all regret what happened. But let's be honest, emergencies are rare. We cannot destroy our sense of order because of one unfortunate misunderstanding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others scowled. I stood. Unfortunate misunderstanding? Monica, my wife almost died. Her eyes locked on mine, steel behind her smile. And everyone here sympathizes. But we must also recognize when personal grief clouds judgment. You presented financial records without context, stirring panic. You threatened a security guard doing his job. And now, you're trying to dismantle a system that has protected this neighborhood for years. Guess. Whispers. Some people were staring at me like maybe I was unstable. I forced my voice calm. The invoices aren't lies. They're county records. The fire marshal's letters aren't suggestions. They're warnings. And obstructing emergency services isn't protection, it's a felony. Before I could say more, Monica cut me off. Do you see neighbors? He shouts, he accuses, he disrupts. This is not the behavior of someone who wants unity. This is chaos. That word again. Chaos. Priya stood suddenly, bouncing her baby on her hip. Chaos is watching a woman gasp for air while an ambulance sits outside a gate. Chaos is fines for strollers and ramps. Don't twist this. The crowd erupted again. Arguments broke out between rows, voices rising, accusations flying. Some demanded Monica resign. Others muttered about troublemakers. The room was splitting in half, and Monica thrived on division. In the middle of the shouting, she lifted her voice above the noise. If we allow one man's bitterness to tear us apart, then we all lose. We must stand united. We must not let misinformation divide us. Her eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge her. But I noticed something then. For all her bluster, her hand was shaking slightly as she held her clipboard. Sweat glistened at her temple. The mask was slipping. She was fighting harder because she knew the ground beneath her was crumbling. I raised my phone. If you want to talk about misinformation, I said, then let's ask someone who doesn't care about HOA politics. I tapped the screen and projected an email onto the clubhouse TV, the county fire marshal's official warning, stamped and signed. The words glowed across the room. Failure to maintain emergency access endangers residents and may result in liability. The room fell silent. Even Monica's voice faltered. Mr. Alvarez slammed his cane on the floor. You ignored this. You gambled with our lives. More neighbors shouted in agreement. The tide was shifting again. Monica tried to recover, stammering about procedures and clarifications, but the authority in her tone was gone. The mask she wore so well, the confident dictator cloaked in professionalism, was cracked wide open. I leaned forward, my voice steady. This isn't about me. This isn't about fines or dues. It's about trust. And you betrayed it. Her lips pressed tight, eyes darting to the exit. For the first time, she looked cornered. The meeting ended in chaos. Real chaos this time, not the kind Monica warned about, but the kind born when truth collides with lies. Neighbors clustered in groups, arguing, demanding answers. Monica slipped out the side door, her shoulders hunched, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. I stood there, heart pounding, watching her retreat. I knew she wasn't finished. She'd try again in some new way. People like Monica didn't go down without dragging others with them. But the mask had slipped. And once people see the cracks, they don't forget. That night, Ellen asked me what happened. I told her everything. The shouting, the documents, Monica's performance. She listened, then smiled faintly through her exhaustion. "Keep pushing," she whispered. "Shadows don't last when you shine light on them." I kissed her forehead, holding on to her words. Because I knew the war with Monica was far from over. The gate had opened. The mask had slipped. And the next battle would be uglier than any yet. When someone has ruled with petty cruelty for long enough, their first instinct at the first sign of collapse is to strike back. They call it defense. I call it preemptive cruelty. Monica didn't sulk. She mobilized. Over the next 48 hours, the neighborhood changed tone. The polite curiosity that had driven people to our gate became a brittle, suspicious murmur. Her email list got a flurry of messages. Calm, professional, laced with legal jargon. She hired a lawyer, a woman with a steel bob and a voice that cut to the point. The lawyer's first memo landed in my inbox like a gauntlet. It accused me of defamation, of publicly disseminating misleading and confidential documents. It included demands, an apology posted to every neighborhood channel, a retraction, and the promise of legal action if I didn't comply within 7 days. It warned residents that false accusations could destabilize community property values. The threat was sly, wrapped in concern for the HOA's reputation, but aimed at my wallet and my standing. Monica's playbook had always been simple. Weaponize process, weaponize paperwork, and make resistance expensive. Then the social smear campaign began. I watched it happen with a modern helplessness. My face framed in grainy screenshots and edited captions across community forums and the private Facebook group most neighbors used. Someone stitched together a grainy clip of me shouting at the gate and looped the audio to make it sound hysterical. Someone else posted an anonymous, insider message accusing me of forging invoices to avoid HOA fees. It had no facts, but it had momentum. Comments multiplied faster than facts could catch up. Drama, some wrote. Watch out for troublemakers, others said. Even kind people were susceptible. The human brain prefers a tidy narrative. One villain, one victim. Complexity takes effort. Monica was offering simplicity. This man lashed out. We were maintaining order. She didn't stop there. The HOA office sent out a stack of fines, notices for nuisance behavior and disturbing the peace. One citation accused me of harassment of HOA officials. Another claimed my actions had caused undue stress among residents. They attached a bill for administrative fees and legal costs. It felt like they were trying to suffocate me with paperwork, the same tactic they used to silence everyone else for so long. It was the kind of pressure that pushed people into silence. Pressure that asked neighbors to trade solidarity for safety. Who wanted to risk being associated with a man facing legal notices? Who wanted the inconvenience of depositions, the stress of court dates? My phone buzzed constantly that week. Supportive messages, yes, dozens of them from people who'd seen the truth. But there were also texts that made my chest hollow. Old friends asking if I was sure I wanted to fight this. An aunt suggested I settle to avoid scandal. The push to back down came in waves. Monica was betting that the current of social pressure would carry me under. But the thing about pressure is it reveals what's built inside. Under fear, I found steadiness. I was not a man without resources. I had a career built on documents, process, and exposing flimsy constructions for what they were. I also had allies, people who had nothing to gain from me and everything to lose if the HOA's tactics went unchecked. I began to respond circuitously, methodically. For every slanderous post she seeded, I had an archival record. For every alleged misplaced invoice, I had procurement requests and time-stamped emails. For the fines, I had the law. I hired a small civil attorney, someone who didn't scare the neighbors with billboards but knew how to file a motion that made people uncomfortable in courtrooms. The first step was offensive documentation. My attorney sent a reply to Monica's counsel that wasn't a groveling apology but a legal standing. A notice of intent to sue for defamation if the HOA's public statements were not retracted. It referenced county law, the fire marshal's warnings, and the paramedics' incident report, copies attached. In the same packet we included HOA minutes where Monica had voted against the Knoxbox installation and emails that tied the payments to SecureGate Solutions directly to her committee's approvals. She pivoted again. This time she used municipal machinery. The HOA filed a complaint to a county inspector alleging unsafe modifications to my property, the ramp, the visible medical equipment, unauthorized structural changes. It smelled like strategic sabotage, an attempt to get code enforcement officers to visit my house and dig for any pretext to fine or shame us. On a humid Tuesday, an inspector arrived with a clipboard. My stomach tightened as he walked the perimeter, camera out, jotting notes. For a long minute I watched and tried not to breathe. The ramp, installed to ADA standards, was measured and the paperwork requested. I voluntarily presented everything: contractor's licenses, permits, payments. He flipped through my binder, frowned at a missing form from years before, something minor and human, a certificate misplaced during a move. It was a tiny crack Monica exploited. He issued a compliance notice, no immediate fine, but a mandated correction within 30 days. It was the kind of bureaucratic scrape that sounds small, but any scrape becomes infection when layered with powered intimidation. That evening, the neighborhood gossip took a cruel new tone. Maybe the ramp was too much, someone whispered on a porch. Maybe he should have handled it differently. The plot to isolate me took shape: seed doubt, push legal inconvenience, wait for people to shrink back. But the isolation didn't take. We had enough people left who'd seen the truth to counter her narrative. Some knocked on my door with meals, freshly made, warm, and a promise, "We'll come to court if you need us," they said. Mr. Alvarez and Priya were unwavering, their voices loud in community chats. A few other board members who had previously gone along with Monica's demands quietly reached out and indicated they might be open to cooperating with an independent audit. The tide was not monolithic. Monica's reach had limits. I also set a trap that would make her overplay: transparency. If she wanted to use secrecy and spin, I would expose her networks of small corruptions under bright procedural lights. I filed Freedom of Information requests. I documented every interaction, every emailed demand. I posted the paramedics' incident report on the community board with a calm note: "This is factual. This is what happened." The post didn't scream. It listed times, names, and signatures. The clash changed the social ecology. Where Monica attacked with law, I attacked with evidence. Where she weaponized fear, I weaponized clarity. But that meant the battlefield moved, from the bar of public sentiment to the sterile, decisive halls of law and audit. And Monica, feeling pressure for the first time, responded like someone running out of clean air. Her attacks grew sharper and more reckless. Anonymous complaints were filed with the county. An unsigned petition circulated calling for my removal from neighborhood committees. Her lawyer hinted at civil suits. Her threats were no longer veiled. They were explicit. In the end, the counterattack revealed something important. Power built on fear fights fiercer than power built on consent. But fear is brittle when met with facts. The question was not whether Monica would strike. It was whether she would overreach. The week closed with two things: another compliance notice on my door, and a subpoena slipped under my attorney's door for a deposition. Monica had escalated to legal force. She had drawn a line and dared me to cross it. I slept poorly that night, but instead of dread I felt something like purpose. I had exposed the rotten infrastructure behind her tyranny, and now the formal mechanisms, inspectors, subpoenas, audits, would do what they do best: demand facts under oath. That's when the war entered a new stage. It was no longer neighborhood politics. It was process. And process is unforgiving to those who think the rules are only for other people. The battle was moving into neutral rooms with fluorescent lights where signatures mattered and lies could be measured. If Monica wanted a courtroom, she would get one. If she wanted to drag us through paper, we would answer with paper. But by turning up the lights on the system, I had also given myself the strongest weapon I'd used so far. The truth, recorded and time-stamped, right under my sleeve. The disclosure would force choices, by neighbors, by the county, by Monica herself. And in those choices, I hoped, the rotten would finally come unstuck. The deposition room smelled like stale coffee and cheap carpet, an atmosphere designed to make people uncomfortable until they said something they shouldn't. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, legal pads lay in neat rows, and a court reporter clicked away, her fingers a metronome marking the truth. I'd never liked being the center of attention, but the world had a way of forcing you into the hot seat when you refused to look away. Monica arrived with the same crisp step she used at board meetings, though now the blazer looked a size too small for the guilt that had been pressed into it. Her lawyer, steel bob and clipped sentences, sat beside her, every gesture an exit strategy. Across from us sat Ryan Lister, nephew and nominal owner of SecureGate Solutions, his jaw tight, his truck's shine still a recent memory in his expensive shoes. My attorney, a lean woman named Carla, had a quiet confidence that settled over me like armor. She had a stack of documents, bank transfers, invoices, stamped county notices, and a calm way of pointing at a line item and asking a simple question until the truth either answered or exposed itself. The trick was to make complexity weary, truth often hid in repetition. Mr. Lister, Carla began, how many emergency override repairs did you bill the HOA for in 2023? He shifted, looked at his counsel, then read the prepared number. 24. Carla placed a tabbed invoice on the table. And how many service calls did you actually complete? Silence. He flipped through a ledger. 18. So 6 invoices were billed without service, Carla said, quiet as a blade. Correct. Ryan's throat worked. There could be timing differences. Carla's pen tapped the wood like a metronome. Do your records show any emergency override work performed after June of 2023? He squinted, scrolled through his phone, then folded. No, the room took that in. A dozen neighbors had driven him to the clubhouse that week uncertain, half certain they were witnessing a crime scene, and now the paper said it plainly, billed repairs that never happened. Monica watched with a face that tried to be composed but betrayed a new uncertainty. Her hands trembled when she took a sip of water. I watched her because her small gestures were the map of how power was dissolving. When bureaucrats build empires on intimidation, the first sign of collapse is a tremor in a hand that has never known consequence. Depositions are exhausting like that. Question after question peeled varnish from the official gloss of a person. Ryan kept returning to the same word, recommendations, as if fixes could be suggestions and invoices a polite request. He answered some questions truthfully and others with legalese. Once, under cross, he said, we did advise on preventative upkeep. Carla took the bait. And who paid your advisory fees, Mr. Lister? He swallowed. The HOA. And who directed the HOA to consult you? Ryan hesitated. The board's maintenance committee. And who sat on that committee? Carlet. Seated beside him, Monica said nothing. When residents took the stand, the weight of small indignities became testimony heavy as stones. Mrs. Hargrove described a citation for a flower box. A man named Cole testified about being fined for a guest's late return. Priya, steady and luminous even under the strain of being a new mother, told the room about the sticker that had appeared on her stroller. Improper sidewalk use, $75 fine. Her voice was even, not vengeful. The steadiness made the lie brittle. Between witnesses, people whispered. Lines formed, neighbors choosing sides almost without words. Some approached me in hallways to grip my shoulder and say, we should have done this months ago. Others avoided eye contact, the social reflex of survival. There were new splinters, a group of older residents who still blamed ruffians and disruption. A core group who had turned the rage from that night into sustained civic action. Fault lines appeared not just underfoot but in kitchen conversations, in the way kids were allowed to play in some yards but not others. The deposition produced 3 things that mattered: admissions of incomplete work, a trail of payments to a private account, and an odd notation in Ryan's ledger, an electronic transfer to a shell company registered in another state. It was a line that didn't belong, the kind of off-rhythm that screamed irregularity to anyone who knew what to listen for. Carla circled it with a pen and requested a banking subpoena. That night, we sat in the dim kitchen with coffee gone cold between us, while Ellen, fragile but mending, listened from the couch. She didn't need to read the invoices to know how close we'd come to losing something she couldn't afford to lose. Her fingers threaded through mine like an anchor. "I never wanted this," she said. "I just wanted our life." The sentence carried a fierce tenderness that made the document pile look absurd and holy at once. But the legal meat of the case was only half the story. The other half was social, how a community chooses to respond when it discovers the seam where influence and profit had been stitched together. Some neighbors doubled down on Monica, publicly if not privately, out of habit or fear. A few stood by her nephew, claiming he was a small business owner trying to provide a service. Others who benefited from the status quo, the people who had accepted free gate repairs, the ones who sipped coffee at Monica's holiday table, began to grow quiet. Power often survives on courtesy. When that quiet cracks, the facade splits. Toward the end of the week, Carla came back into the kitchen holding a thin envelope clipped with banking statements. "We got the subpoena," she announced. And the bank turned over transactions. She spread the pages like a surgeon revealing an incision. Red numbers, transfers to accounts with names that meant nothing and addresses in states we hadn't even thought to look. But one line almost glowed. A transfer that originated from the HOA's operating account, routed through an LLC, and then to an account at a shell bank in a different state. Money that vanished from the books with a neatness that left a professional thrill in Carla's eyes. "You think that's it?" Ellen asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Is that where it goes?" Carla didn't smile. "It's where we start. This looks like laundering. It looks like someone built a back channel." The kitchen felt smaller, as if the idea of wider complicity was a new and dangerous weather front moving over our lives. It wasn't just Monica and her nephew. The records whispered of contractors who billed for services that never happened, of votes tallied with missing signatures, and of board meetings that happened in whispers at diners, not in the clubhouse. The more we pulled, the more threads unraveled. A network, small, efficient, and secret, had been woven into place over years. It had fed on neighbors' fear and comfort, and it was built to be hard to see until someone with patience began to follow the money. That realization split the night. If there was a ring, how wide did it span? If money left the community to an out-of-state account, who was on the other end? A nephew is easy to name, but a network is a pattern. Patterns require time and diligence to expose. We slept badly that week, Ellen on medicine and rest, me replaying meetings and depositions in the dark, Carla drafting subpoenas and asking questions that would rattle doors. The fault lines under our street had suddenly become fault lines under our lives. People chose sides by whisper and glance, and the neighborhood that once moved as one under Monica's foot was starting to shift in ways she hadn't accounted for. On Friday, Carla called in with a new instruction. "We're going to serve another subpoena. And we may need to go public with the banking link unless the board comes clean." Her tone carried the tiny thrill of someone watching a plan come alive. But underneath that excitement was something colder, the understanding that we were now dealing in chains. Once financial networks get named, people do not like to be in the crosshairs. The chapter closed on an odd, electric note. My phone buzzed with a single anonymous message. No contact, just a line. "You're digging where you shouldn't. Be careful." It wasn't a threat I couldn't meet with words. It was a reminder that the deeper you dig, the more you expose, and the more people will fight to keep the dirt in place. I read it twice, then deleted it, feeling the house press in and the bright, legal paper burn like a bell. There were answers coming, slow, procedural, late-night calls and subpoenas. The network we were unraveling had teeth, but so did the truth. And for the first time since the ambulance lights had frozen at the gate, I felt like the ground under me might actually hold. The first subpoena had cracked a door. The second one ripped it off its hinges. Carla slid the papers across my kitchen table one gray morning, her eyes gleaming with a grim satisfaction. "We've got names," she said. I scanned the list. Dozens of transfers routed from our HOA's account through SecureGate Solutions and into a string of LLCs. Each one sounded like a shell: Greenview Management, Lakeshore Development Partners, Sunfield Capital. Different states. Different banks. But a common pattern: money disappearing, then resurfacing as consulting fees or compliance services. Ellen looked up from her tea, her face pale. "So it's not just them," she whispered. "No," Carla said. "It's bigger. A network of HOAs across the county. Maybe across the state." The realization was like a slow knife turning. Monica hadn't just been a petty tyrant with a clipboard. She was a local cog in something larger, an organized ring feeding off homeowners' dues, weaponizing rules, and laundering profits through phantom companies. And if they'd done it here, how many other neighborhoods were trapped behind their gates? The pressure started the next day. At dawn, I found an envelope shoved into my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Stop digging. People get hurt when they don't know when to quit." The words were typed, but the message was unmistakably human. A chill settled in my spine. I folded it carefully and placed it in a folder I'd already labeled in black marker: threats. By mid-morning, Ellen called from the living room. "Someone's outside." I looked through the blinds. A black SUV idled at the curb. Windows tinted too dark for county regulations. It didn't move when I stared. It just sat, engine humming, like a predator at rest. After 15 minutes, it rolled away, slow enough to let me see the license plate, except there wasn't one. Just a blank frame. That evening, I met Alvarez at his porch. He leaned on his cane, his voice low. "They don't like that you're pulling at threads," he said. "I've seen cars like that before. Years ago, when I was in the union. They're testing you. Seeing if you scare easy." I told him I didn't. But my hands told another story. They shook when I lit the porch light. The community itself was splitting wider now. Priya and others stood firm, her baby on her hip as she told anyone who would listen that Monica was lying. More neighbors joined her, emboldened by the depositions. But another faction was forming too, people muttering about witch hunts, parroting Monica's lawyer's lines about personal vendettas and misinformation. At night, arguments broke out in the street. One evening I heard two men yelling near the gate, one shouting that the HOA was stealing from them, the other screaming that people like me were destroying property values. It wasn't just law anymore. It was faith. People were choosing what they wanted to believe, and once belief hardened, facts bounced off like stones against iron. Carla worked like a surgeon, carving deeper into the paper trail. She showed me emails subpoenaed from HOA servers, communications between Monica and shadowy consultants. One message chilled me. "Ensure gate stay manual override disabled until further notice. Compliance review delayed. Billing cycle unaffected." It was dated 2 weeks before Ellen's attack. That wasn't negligence. That was intent. Carla looked up. "If this holds in court, it's conspiracy to endanger. And if we tie it to the LLCs, it's racketeering." Racketeering. The word didn't belong to tidy cul-de-sacs and trimmed hedges. It belonged to crime families, to networks that didn't just profit but punished. And now they knew my name. The intimidation escalated. 2 nights later, someone spray-painted my driveway, liar. Thick black strokes, dripping like blood under the porch light. Ellen gasped when she saw it. I grabbed the hose, scrubbing until my arms ached, but the outline lingered like a scar. Neighbors whispered the next morning. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Others avoided my eyes. Monica didn't mention it at the next board session, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew the message had been sent. But intimidation has a strange effect. It doesn't always silence. Sometimes it steals. I stood in that clubhouse again, this time holding up the subpoenaed email about disabling the override. My voice carried over the murmurs. This isn't rumor. This isn't bitterness. This is evidence. They knowingly disabled emergency access to profit from repairs. And my wife nearly paid the price. Monica's face blanched, but her lawyer jumped in, objecting, claiming taken out of context. The crowd wasn't convinced. Murmurs turned into shouts. Priya's voice rose above them. How many more lives do they want to gamble for money? The room fractured again, but the tide was turning. More people demanded answers. More eyes turned against Monica. And yet, I couldn't shake the SUV, the spray paint, the envelope. This wasn't just her anymore. She was flailing, yes, but someone bigger was still behind the curtain, pulling strings. That night, Ellen asked the question I'd been avoiding. If this goes deeper, what if they come after us? Not with fines or paint. Really come after us? I didn't answer right away. I sat with her hand in mine, listening to the oxygen hiss and the crickets beyond the glass. Finally, I said, then we make sure they regret it. Because if the HOA thought they could bully us into silence, they hadn't learned the one lesson that had carried me through every battle since the night of the sirens. Fear only works if you play by their rules. And I wasn't playing anymore. The night it happened, the sky was too quiet. No wind in the hedges, no hum of sprinklers, just a silence that pressed down like a lid. I was in the kitchen, sifting through more bank statements, when the lights flickered. A second later, the house went dark. The oxygen concentrator let out a shrill alarm. Ellen's voice trembled from the living room. John. I grabbed a flashlight, sprinted to her side. The machine was dead, its lifeline cut with the power. The portable tank hissed as I switched her over, but I knew it was a short-term fix. We had maybe an hour. The blackout wasn't a neighborhood outage. Through the window, I saw porch lights glowing on every other house. Just us. And then I noticed the smell. Sharp, chemical, wrong. I stepped outside. Someone had sprayed solvent across the side of our generator, its casing scarred with fresh scratches. Deliberate. Calculated. Sabotage. My phone buzzed with a text. No name, just words. Last warning. So, my hand shook as I dialed 911, reported the tampering, begged for a patrol. But in the back of my mind, I knew how this game worked. HOA ties ran deep. By the time a cruiser showed up, whoever had done this would be gone, watching from somewhere else, waiting for us to blink. When I came back in, Ellen clutched my wrist. You can't fight this alone. Her eyes, pale with fear but steady with resolve, held mine. If they're willing to do this, you have to show everyone. All of it. No more whispers. No more paperwork. Show them everything. Her words hit me like a gavel. She was right. I'd been fighting with subpoenas and depositions, thinking the system would be enough. But systems are slow. Networks of rot are patient. My wife didn't have the luxury of waiting for a court date. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to fight behind closed doors anymore. I was going to burn their mask off in public. The next day, I set up Ellen's tablet on the kitchen table. The light was bad, the sound tinny, but it would do. I drafted a single title, The Truth About Oaksgate HO. When I hit Go Live, I expected a handful of viewers, neighbors, maybe a few curious strangers. Instead, the counter shot past 1,000 within minutes. Someone had shared the link on a local forum. By the time I spoke my first sentence, 10,000 people were watching. I began with the night of the sirens. I described the gate, the ambulance lights frozen, my wife gasping for air. I didn't shout. I didn't dramatize. I spoke plain and steady, letting the facts breathe. Behind me, Ellen sat quietly, oxygen tubing visible against her cheek. Then I started showing documents. Invoices for fake repairs. Emails instructing that emergency overrides remain disabled. Bank transfers routed through shells in 3 states. Every page I'd saved, every signature I'd collected. I held them up to the camera, one by one, until the scrolling chat was a blur of disbelief and fury. This isn't just negligence, I said, my voice trembling but strong. This is organized theft. They gambled with human lives to line their pockets. And last night, they cut power to my house to try and silence me. The chat erupted. Expose them. Call the FBI. Name every name. So I did. Monica. Ryan Lister. SecureGate Solutions. The LLCs. The HOA board members who signed the votes. Their names rolled off my tongue like an indictment, each one burned into the stream's recording, each one echoing across a digital crowd that had grown past 50,000. And then something happened I hadn't expected. People started sharing their own stories. Viewers posted about their HOAs in other states, similar scams, similar intimidation, similar consultants. The comment feed turned into a flood of testimony, a living archive of how far the rot stretched. Halfway through, the stream glitched. The video froze, audio stuttered. My stomach dropped. Were they trying to cut the feed? I slammed the record locally option, praying the file would save. The camera flickered back on, but not before the chat exploded with speculation. They're watching you. Don't stop. We're recording too. That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. Thousands of people had mirrors of my truth now. Even if they shut me down, the story would survive. By the 2-hour mark, over 200,000 people were watching. National reporters had joined the chat. A retired federal investigator dropped a comment. This matches racketeering patterns. Document everything. I ended the stream with Ellen's voice. Weak, rasping, but clear. They almost let me die for money. Don't let them do this to anyone else. The counter ticked past 500,000 views before I shut the feed off. My hands shook as I powered down the tablet. Ellen reached for me, her palm cool against mine. You did it, she whispered. But I wasn't so sure. Because as the house settled into silence, headlights swept across our driveway. A car idled too long, too close. And in my gut, I knew the network had just been dragged into the light. And monsters fight hardest when you shine a flashlight into their den. By sunrise, our street looked less like a neighborhood and more like a crime scene. 2 unmarked sedans idled at the curb, their antennas bristling. Reporters with tripods crowded the sidewalks, shoving microphones toward anyone who dared peek outside. Neighbors gathered in knots, whispering fiercely. Some shot me thumbs up when they saw me through the blinds. Others glared, their arms folded tight across their chests, as if I'd detonated a bomb in their peaceful cul-de-sac. The live stream had gone viral overnight. News outlets clipped segments. The footage of Monica smirking as an ambulance waited at the gate played on repeat across breakfast television. My name trended with hashtags I never wanted. Hashtag #echigit, hashtag let the ambulance. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, tubing hissing softly. She watched the coverage with an expression I couldn't read. Relief and dread mixed like oil and water. You've set it all on fire, she said quietly. Now let's see who burns. At 9 sharp, a knock rattled the door. Not a neighbor. Not a vandal. Law enforcement. 2 FBI agents stood on the porch, badges raised. One was a tall woman with braided hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. The other, older, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp with the weariness of someone who had seen every kind of scheme. Mr. Dawson? The woman asked. We need to talk about your broadcast. They came inside, declined coffee, spread their files across my dining table. They'd already seen the stream. Already flagged the transactions. What they wanted now was access to my originals. Every invoice, every email, every subpoena we'd pulled. This fits a pattern we've been tracking, the older agent said. Kickbacks. Fraudulent maintenance contracts. HOA boards as laundering fronts. Yours is just the first community that put it all in the open. So I wasn't just a whistleblower. I was a live case study. The agents promised protection, but their eyes told a harder truth. Protection had limits. Networks like this didn't fold quietly. They fought dirty. By noon, Monica's fortress cracked. News cameras swarmed her driveway. She stood at the top of her porch steps, mascara streaking, lawyer at her side. Lies, she shouted into the cameras. All lies. A personal vendetta. The Dawsons have fabricated documents to cover their violations. But her voice shook. And when a reporter shouted, "What about the disabled woman who almost died?" Monica had no answer. An hour later, deputies served search warrants at her house and at SecureGate's office. Ryan Lister was led out in handcuffs, head ducked, his designer belt gleaming in the sunlight. The neighborhood buzzed with cheers and curses in equal measure. That night, my phone lit up nonstop. Messages from strangers across the country. Some thanked me for exposing what they'd long suspected about their own HOAs. Others sent threats. You think you can destroy years of work? We know where you live. I saved them all in the threats folder. The fracture lines in our own neighborhood widened into canyons. Priya organized a petition demanding Monica's permanent removal and a federal audit. Half the block signed within hours. Alvarez walked door to door despite his cane, telling anyone who'd listen, they almost killed a woman. That's the only fact that matters. But across the street, a group of loyalists gathered in Karen Hart's garage. They called my live stream reckless. They claimed property values were collapsing. They muttered about counter lawsuits. Fear and denial mixed into a bitter stew, and they spooned it to anyone willing to eat. One evening, as I rolled the trash bin to the curb, a man from that faction hissed, "You've ruined this place." His voice cracked with something that sounded more like desperation than rage. I didn't answer. Because maybe he was right, I had ruined something. Not the neighborhood, but the illusion that it had ever been safe under Monica's rule. The fallout reached further than I imagined. Reporters dug into county records. They found 5 other HOAs with contracts linked to the same shell LLCs. More victims came forward. A widow in a different state spoke on air about how her husband's ambulance had been delayed at a gate under maintenance. A father described paying thousands in mandatory landscaping compliance fees to a company that didn't even exist. The network was unraveling, strand by strand. But unraveling networks don't just collapse. They thrash. One night, around 2 a.m., the SUV came back. Same blank plate. Same hum. This time, it didn't just idle. Its headlights blazed into our bedroom window, burning white against the curtains. Ellen stirred, her breathing shallow, as I stood frozen in the dark. Then the SUV revved once, twice, and peeled away, tires screeching. On the porch railing, I found a new note, taped with electrical tape. "You're next." I gave the note to the FBI the next morning. They logged it, photographed it, promised patrol cars would circle more often. But promises don't quiet the sound of tires on asphalt in the middle of the night. Promises don't steady a hand that trembles when it locks the door. Ellen looked at me across the kitchen, her eyes weary but fierce. "You can't back down now," she said. "If they're threatening you, it means you've hit the vein." She was right. The fallout wasn't the end. It was just the aftershock before the next quake. And if Monica thought her empire had fallen, she was wrong. Empires like this don't collapse overnight. They retreat, regroup, and come back harder. I just had to be ready when they did. The first strike came in smoke. It was a Tuesday night, late enough that Ellen had drifted into uneasy sleep, oxygen hissing like a lullaby. I was at the desk, drowning in files, when the scent hit me, burning plastic. I rushed to the window. At the edge of our driveway, our trash bin was ablaze. Flames licked upward, orange against the dark, sparks snapping in the air. Someone had doused it with accelerant. The fire roared too fast, too hot, to be an accident. I grabbed the hose, water hissing against the inferno, but my eyes kept darting toward the street. The black SUV was there again, parked just beyond the glow. The driver didn't move. Didn't help. Just watched. And when the flames died into steam, the SUV rolled away, silent as a predator returning to the dark. That was their message. We can get closer. The FBI logged the incident, but even they admitted it was low-level intimidation. No arrests, no guarantees. Just another note in a growing case file. But I could feel the escalation humming beneath the surface. These people weren't used to losing control. Retaliation was inevitable. 2 days later, it came again. This time, in the form of a brake line. I'd driven Ellen to her pulmonology appointment downtown. The day was warm, deceptively ordinary. But as we pulled onto the freeway ramp, the brake pedal sagged beneath my foot. Nothing. The car lurched forward. My pulse detonated. Instinct took over. I yanked the emergency brake, swerved hard, tires screeching. We skidded into the shoulder, my chest heaving, Ellen gasping beside me. When the tow truck arrived, the mechanic's face went pale. "This line's been cut clean," he muttered. Like with a blade. I didn't need him to say more. By now, the threats weren't just notes in a folder. They were knives aimed at the spaces we lived in. But the network had miscalculated one thing. Every strike made me louder. That night, I went live again. Not just with documents this time, but but with evidence of retaliation, photos of the burned bin, the shredded brake line, the SUV's shadow in the street. The stream exploded. Over 1 million viewers in the first hour. "This is what corruption looks like when it's cornered," I said into the camera. "They don't argue facts. They try to silence. But we're not silent anymore." The chat went wild. Hashtags flared. Lawyers, journalists, even former FBI agents chimed in. What had started as one neighborhood scandal was now a national story. But exposure comes with its own cost. The following evening, as I walked Ellen to the porch for fresh air, I noticed a flyer taped to every mailbox on the block. Bold letters screamed, "Dawson is destroying Oaksgate. Property values plummeting. Neighbors suffer because of his lies." It was signed, Friends of Oaksgate HOA. Some neighbors tore theirs down in disgust. Others left them up like warning signs. One man across the street muttered, "Maybe they're right," when he caught me looking. The retaliation wasn't just physical now. It was psychological, social. Divide the neighborhood. Turn fear into fuel. But the network made a mistake. In trying to crush me, they overlooked the people they'd already alienated. Alvarez, cane in hand, marched house to house, telling everyone, "This isn't about property values. This is about life and death." Priya printed counterflyers with screenshots from the live stream, plastering them over Monica's propaganda. The HOA's stranglehold was breaking, not just under subpoenas, but under the weight of its own cruelty. Still, I knew the next strike would be worse. One night, near midnight, Ellen shook me awake. "Listen," she whispered. "A sound downstairs. A creak where no creak should be." I grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding, and crept toward the living room. The front door lock glinted, scratched, half pried open. Someone had tried to get in. The porch light had scared them off, or maybe the fact that I was awake. But the message was clear. The fight wasn't at the gates anymore. It was at my doorstep. The FBI installed a security detail after that. 2 plainclothes agents parked discreetly down the block. But even their presence couldn't dissolve the gnawing dread. Every car idling too long, every shadow shifting near the hedges, felt like the network breathing against my neck. Ellen squeezed my hand that night, her eyes tired but steady. "They're trying to break you," she said. "But every time they strike, you hit harder. That's why they're scared." I held on to that thought as I stared into the dark, waiting for the next move. Because retaliation always escalates. And somewhere beyond the hedges, someone was already planning the next strike. And when it came, I promised myself I'd be ready. The mornings after long nights of fear have a peculiar light, thin, almost apologetic, as if the day itself is careful not to wake anyone too abruptly. That morning, stretched sheets and steaming mugs could have been ordinary. Instead, they felt like the calm before a final, irrevocable moment. The FBI's presence had become part of the neighborhood's new furniture, unmarked cars, a rotating detail, agents who smiled politely but watched everything. They told me the investigation had broadened, that warrants were moving, that multiple districts had been coordinated. It sounded clinical and distant until officers arrived at dawn with rifles slung and determination fixed on their faces. Then it felt real. Monica's house was first. They wrapped the property in caution tape and moved like chess players. Search teams swept rooms while evidence techs photographed every ledger, every sticky note with numbers, every corner where a human hand might have tucked an invoice into shadow. Her lawyer argued in a whisper. She watched with mascara streaking, phone clutched taut. When they led her out in cuffs, there was a brief, stunned hush. People peered through windows, heads tilted like gulls watching a slow fall. The cameras came back, hungry and efficient. This time the footage wasn't just sound bites. It was movement. The search, the cuff, the careful uncurling of a spreadsheet that seemed to breathe complicity. Ryan Lister's office was next. File cabinets opened, servers unplugged, accountants escorted in handcuffs. Over the next week, teams fanned out, executing warrants at addresses in 3 different counties. Small LLCs, purchased for a few $100s apiece, were seized. Bank accounts frozen. Paper trial evidence became real, tangible, and terrifying. But law is methodical. Arrests were accompanied by careful press statements, We allege, we are investigating, no charges yet in some cases. The legal machinery is polite in its pronouncements. The theater outside the courthouse was not. Survivors of the HOA's petty cruelties waited with signs. Neighbors who had once hidden behind hedges now held banners that read, "People before power." People who once cowered now cheered when judges signed seizure orders. Still, the agents warned me, process takes time. Evidence must be airtight. Witnesses must be called, depositions taken, corroborations made. I had a front row seat as federal prosecutors built a case like a cathedral, brick by cautious brick. Racketeering charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, words that felt both gleaming and heavy. They wanted a case that would survive appeal. They wanted the story to be indisputable. In court, the truth is examined slowly, and truth has a stubborn endurance. Documents were read aloud. Monica's emails instructing delays, Ryan's invoices without service calls, transfers to shell accounts. Witnesses, Guard Todd, Paramedic Na, Mrs. Hargrove, Priya, recounted specifics that tied the paper to the night the ambulance stalled. Their testimonies stitched the narrative to something human and unarguable. There were moments that felt cinematic. Standing in the gallery one Tuesday, Ellen's hand in mine, we watched as a prosecutor replayed the clip of Monica at the gate. The video was unembellished, raw. Like a ghost, it carried all the cruelty in small actions. The smirk, the pause, the dismissal. The courtroom was quiet enough you could hear the projector hum. When the prosecutor asked, "Did Ms. Barton know the override was disabled?" a county engineer took the stand and said, under oath, "Yes, we warned her repeatedly." The ruling was decisive where it mattered. In an emergency injunction, a judge ordered the HOA dissolved pending further action and placed the community under a court-appointed receiver. The receiver's first act was to reconfigure the gate system, a fail-safe override, remote access keyed to first responders, monthly audits logged and published. The receiver froze the HOA's account and set a forensic audit in motion. The relief was not theatrical, it was practical and quiet. The tech team replaced the gate's control board in a single afternoon. The new Knox box was tested in front of the entire community, firefighters, deputies, an engineer, and a swarm of skeptical neighbors. When the override worked, simple and humming, I felt something like a breath expand in my chest, the kind you take after holding water too long under the surface. It was safety that smelled like grease and new metal. Monica was indicted on multiple counts. Ryan and several shadowy contractors faced charges that suggested this was more than nepotism, it was organized exploitation. Their defense teams flailed in the press, insisting on procedural errors, selective recordings, and character attacks. Old habits die hard. The old guard's reflex is to muddy water. But when piles of invoices and sworn statements stand solid like a dam, the murk can't carry away the facts. The community rallied in small ways that mattered. Priya started a support group for families who'd been threatened or fined, offering a place to talk without fear of reprisals. Mr. Alvarez organized a neighborhood watch that was more about neighbors looking out for neighbors than about gatekeepers. There were potlucks where, previously, no one would have spoken across the curb. Healing works in tiny, communal increments. Ellen healed too. The doctors said she'd been lucky. The ambulance arrived in time, the intubation held, but her lungs bore the scar of the event, medically and metaphorically. She grew stronger slowly, the oxygen tapering as the weeks slid by. I watched her rediscover small pleasures, the way sunlight fell across the oak, the sound of rain on the porch, the taste of a good, unhurried cup of coffee. Her recovery was a private, stubborn victory that no headline could fully capture. Yet even as justice moved forward, there were edges that didn't quite smooth out. At depositions, one contractor, an intermediary who'd funneled payments through an LLC, refused to answer questions, invoking the fifth. Another witness cut a deal and walked without prison time in exchange for testimony against a higher-up. Someone else moved away with pockets padded and names cleared by clever lawyers. Networks, it turned out, are not leaves that fall cleanly when you pull at a vine. They have roots that burrow deep. And always, in the quiet moments, there was the sense that not all of it had been unearthed. The anonymous SUV, the clipped threats, a database entry with a name that led to a dormant trust overseas, oddities that prosecutors cataloged as leads to chase. Investigations spun on axes grids across jurisdictions. It is the law's function to follow the tracks. It is the human function to wonder what else the night has swallowed. On the day the court declared a temporary victory and placed the HOA under receiver control, neighbors cheered and some cried. Monica was remanded to appear on more serious counts. Ryan faced indictment. A dozen bank accounts were frozen. The financial forensic team issued a preliminary report that tallied missing funds, inflated invoices, and suspicious transfers. The news labeled it a multi-state HOA fraud ring. Headlines like that travel far and fast. They sanitize horror into bullet points, but they also call attention where attention does good. We reclaimed the gate. We reclaimed, in small ways, our streets. We planted new shrubs where the spray paint had scarred. But victory was complicated. There was grief, for the way things had been, for the trust lost, for the neighbors who left the community in bitterness. There was also an altered vigilance. Now volunteer auditors duplicated invoices, meetings were public and filmed, and the new board followed stricter transparency rules enforced by the court. Months later, sitting on the porch with Ellen watching a slow summer sunset, I traced a finger along the railing and felt the scars of where we defended our life. She nudged my shoulder. "We did it," she said, voice small with wonder. "We didn't let them win." "No," I answered. "We pushed them back." But I couldn't say the whole truth, that pushing back had a cost, and that not everything rotten yields to one force of will. While the prosecutions wound forward, there were quiet, unsatisfying compromises. Payouts to contractors who cooperated, immunity deals for lesser players, undisclosed settlements that left questions unanswered. Justice in the legal sense is often partial. It corrects, prosecutes, deters. It rarely restores perfectly what was broken. In the months that followed, other news trickled in. Arrests in 2 neighboring counties. An internal audit of a state registry of LLCs uncovered a sticky path of shell companies. An investigative reporter published a series linking the racket to a handful of real estate interests who had profited from artificially depressed community governance. Counties convened panels. Laws were proposed to increase audits and require emergency override reports to be public. Yet even with progress, there was a private little thing that made me glance over my shoulder now and then. A utility truck idling too long across the street. A name in the FOIA returns that led to a lawyer's firm with unlisted partners. A cryptic notation in a ledger that still refused to translate cleanly. The network had been battered, exposed, and partly dismantled. But like any organism that survives, it adapted. One evening, while stacking dishes by the sink, I noticed an unfamiliar emblem stamped on the underside of an envelope that had come in the mail. Not the HOA's crest, but a logo I didn't recognize. It was faint, almost incidental. I sat with it for a long while, feeling the quiet of a neighborhood peacemaking itself and the subtle tremor that some things are never entirely over. Justice had found its teeth and used them. It had bitten. It had broken some bones. People responsible had been brought into the light, and systems changed in response. But the thin, cautious light of the mornings still felt necessary. We had reclaimed our lives, our gate, our street. We had money refunded and policies rewritten and, for the most part, sleep that wasn't edged with dread. Still, when Ellen and I walked down the cul-de-sac, neighbors waving, kids laughing in the distance, I kept an eye on the shadows beneath the hedges. Not out of paranoia, not anymore, but because some battles keep their memory close, like a scar that tells you not to get careless. "Are you okay?" Ellen asked, sensing my attention. I nodded, and then smiled in a way that held both relief and caution. "We won what we needed to win," I said. "But stay sharp. Some roots die slowly." She laid her head on my shoulder, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, the hollow of peace that comes after a storm. It was imperfect. It was real. Outside, a child's bicycle lay abandoned by the curb. The gate hummed quietly in the background. Solid, functional, and predictable. The neighborhood had changed. So had we. The network that had thought itself untouchable had been pierced, Its leaders would answer questions for a long time. But the long tail of consequence stretched on. And somewhere, in a place we had not yet mapped fully, something muttered and readjusted in the dark. Justice had done its work. Life continued. The fight, if not over, had moved to a new, quieter phase. One where vigilance and community replaced fear and silence. For now, that would have to be enough.